I want to extend a warm Trailblazer welcome to our Lewis and Clark community, as well as the general public that is currently watching. Each year, we intentionally celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's life by reflecting on his civil rights work. Considering all the challenges that have been laid bare by the COVID pandemic, such as the continued infringements on voting rights and pervasive social inequalities, this year our theme is about mindfulness through the lens of Dr. Martin Luther King. Our program will highlight momentous excerpts of Dr. Martin Luther King's speeches. Reflections on mindfulness will certainly be evident in the selected speeches that we're going to share with you. They are going to address our internal struggles and their impact on others. Dr. Martin Luther King's powerful words continue to serve as a guidepost for a better tomorrow. We also are going to read about how he emphasizes love and justice and how all of this pervade the readings we're going to hear. Thereafter, our keynote speaker, Mr. Alonzo Nelson, is going to make excellent connections related to how we can live mindfully by embracing Dr. King's philosophy, by reflecting on how he navigates his identity as a Black man and his pursuit for social justice action in the classroom and in the community. We are certain that today's program will spark conversations that will challenge our personal and collective pursuit for love, justice, and social action for all.
On February 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. preached the drum major instinct from the pulpit of the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Ironically, 2 months before his assassination on April 4th, 1968, He told his congregation what he would like said at his funeral. "I like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King tried to love somebody." Excerpts were played at King's nationally televised funeral service held at the Ebenezer Baptist Church on April 9, 1968. King's sermon was taken from the 1952 homily, Drum Major Instincts, by J. Wallace Hamilton, a well-known liberal white Methodist preacher. Both men tell the biblical story of James and John, who asked Jesus for the most prominent seats in heaven. At the core of their desire was a drum major instinct, a desire to be out front, a desire to lead the parade. King warned his congregation that his desire of the importance can lead to feeling snobbish and a tragic race prejudice. Do you know that a lot of the race problems grow out of the drum major instincts? A need for somebody to feel superior and to feel that their white skin ordained them to be first. Conversely, King preached that when Jesus responded to the request by James and John, he did not rebuke them for their ambition, but he taught the greatness comes from humble servitude. As King put it, Jesus reordered priorities, and he told the disciples to keep feeling the need to be first, but I want you to love first.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was imprisoned in a Birmingham jail in August of 1963 because he participated in nonviolent demonstrations. He wrote in longhand the letter which follows. I would like to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should give the reason for my being in Birmingham since you have been influenced by the argument of outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. Several months ago, our local chapter here in Birmingham invited us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program if one was necessary. We consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promises. I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. 1, determine whether injustices are alive. 2, negotiation. 3, self-purification. And 4, direct action. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no guessing of the facts that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thorough segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of police brutality is known in every section of this country. Its unjust treatment of Negroes in the courts is a notorious reality. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than any other city in this nation. These are the hard, brutal, and unbelievable facts.
Loving Your Enemies, a sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, Montgomery, Alabama, on November 17th, 1957. What an individual must do in seeking to love his enemy is to discover the element of good in his enemy. And every time you begin to hate that person and think of hating that person, realize that there is some good there and look at the good points, which will overbalance the bad points. I've said to you on many occasions that each of us is something of a schizophrenic personality. we're split up and divided against ourselves. And there is something of a civil war going on within all our lives. There is a south of our soul revolting against the north of our soul. And there is this continual struggle within the very structure of every individual life. There is something within us all that causes us to cry out. Ovid, the Latin poet, said, "I see and approve the better things of life, but the evil things I do." Plato said that the human personality is like a chariot of two headstrong horses, each wanting to go in different directions. There is enough stuff in me to make me both a gentleman and a rogue, as said by the Apostle Paul. So somehow the isness of our present nature is out of harmony with the eternal oughtness that forever confronts us. And this simply means that within the best of us, there is some evil. And within the worst of us, there is some good. When we come to see this, we take a different attitude towards individuals. The person who hates you the most has some good in him. Even the nation that hates you the most has some good in it. Even the race that hates you the most has some good in it. And when you come to the point that you look at the face of every man and see deep down within him what religion calls the image of God, you begin to love him in spite of. No matter what he does, you see God's image there. There is an element of goodness that he can never slough off. Discover the element of good in your enemy, and as you seek to hate him, find the center of goodness and place your attention there, and you will take a new attitude.
Out of the 22 civilizations that have risen up, all but about 7 have found themselves in the junk heap of destruction. It is because civilizations fail to have sense enough to dim the lights. And if somebody doesn't have sense enough to turn on the dim and beautiful and powerful lights of love in this world, the whole of our civilization will be purged into the abyss of destruction. And we will all end up destroyed because nobody had any sense on the highway of history. Somewhere, somebody must have some sense. Men must see that force begets force. Hate begets hate. Toughness begets toughness. And it is all a descending spiral, ultimately ending in destruction for all and everybody. Somebody must have sense enough and morality enough to cut off the chain of hate and the chain of evil in this universe. And you do that by love. There's another reason why you should love your enemies, and that is because hate distorts the personality of the hater. We usually think what hate does for the individual hated, or the individuals hated, or the groups hated. But it is even more tragic. It is even more ruinous and injurious to the individual who hates. You just begin hating somebody, and you will begin to do irrational things. You can't see straight when you hate. You can't walk straight when you hate. You can't stand straight. Your vision is distorted. There is nothing more tragic than to see an individual whose heart is filled with hate. He comes to the point that he becomes a pathological case. For the person who hates, who can stand up and see a person, and that person can be beautiful, and you will call them ugly. For the person who hates, the beautiful becomes ugly, and the ugly becomes beautiful. For the person who hates, the good becomes bad, and the bad becomes good. For the person who hates, the true becomes false, and the false becomes true. That's what hate does. You can't see right. The symbol of objectivity is lost. Hate destroys the very structure of the personality of the hater. It's not enough for us to hate your friends, because when you start hating anybody, it destroys the very center of your creative response to life in the universe. So love everybody. Hate at any point is a cancer that gnaws away at the very vital center of your life and your existence. It is like eroding acid that eats away the best and the objective center of your life. So Jesus says love, because hate destroys the hater as well as the hated. That's why Jesus says, love your enemies. Because if you hate your enemies, you have no way to redeem and to transform your enemies. But if you love your enemies, you will discover that at the very root of love is the power of redemption. You just keep loving people and keep loving them, even though they're mistreating you. Here's the person who is a neighbor, and this person is doing something wrong to you and all of that. Just keep being friendly to that person. Keep loving them. Don't do anything to embarrass them. Just keep loving them. And they can't stand it too long. Oh, they react in many ways in the beginning. They react with bitterness because they're mad because you love them like that. They react with guilt feelings. And sometimes they'll hate you a little more at the transition period, but just keep loving them. And by the power of your love, they will break down under the load. That's love, you see. It is redemptive. And that is why Jesus says love. There's something about love that builds up and is creative. There's something about hate that tears down and is destructive. So love your enemies.
Hello, my name is Jared Hennings. I am one of the staff, faculty people here at Lewis and Clark Community College who is involved with helping to plan our Martin Luther King Jr. annual celebratory event. And one of our challenges in planning the event is to find a keynote speaker who can engage, who can motivate, who can inspire our students here, and to additionally even offer words of wisdom based on their background, based on their experience, and based on their expertise. We feel extremely confident and pleased that we have a keynote presenter who fits that bill. Alonzo Nelson is a legacy educator, having grown up in the household of math teachers. He graduated with his Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from Southeast Missouri State University, with hopes of transferring into pharmacy school to become a pharmacist. He aspired also to become a professional track athlete and began substitute teaching to supplement his time training. After a kindergarten experience, he instantly fell in love with teaching. And as a result, he entered a transition to teaching program called TTT. From that experience, he earned his Master's of Education with an emphasis in mathematics from McKendree University. In 2012, Alonzo began his professional teaching career at his old high school, East St. Louis Senior High. After his second year there, he helped charter the Math Honor Society and joined the track and field coaching staff. The next year, he was instrumental in starting the Running Start program, which allowed students, after their sophomore year, to take classes at the local community college, which allowed them to earn both their high school diploma and associate's degree at their graduation. The next school year, he moved to a new district, becoming the only black male teacher with a student population of 2,100, 45% black, and 55% white. Outside of his school district, Alonzo is the education chair of the 100 Black Men of Metropolitan St. Louis and a registered yoga teacher and co-owner of a black yoga studio, the Collective STL. Alonzo believes teaching is a ministry, and those who do so are guiding the future of our nation. His passion is for the well-being of the black community and changing the way we as adults and students view education and the profession of teaching. The cherry on top, Alonzo is the father of a beautiful 2-year-old girl, Harper, and the husband of 2-time Olympic gold and silver medalist, Dawn Harper Nelson. I am very pleased and happy to introduce to you our keynote presenter, Alonzo Nelson.
Hello. Today, on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, let's talk about yoking together people and peace. The purpose of this discussion, because I'm going to have you to journal as you're listening to this. You might have to pause the video and maybe have some dialogue. And so I'm going to call it a discussion. So the purpose of this discussion is to think about how mindfulness can bring us closer to a place of peace inwardly and in the world. So, stop whatever you're doing, close your eyes, make sure your feet are flat on the ground, and listen to this sound. Inhale, lift your hands overhead. Exhale, bring your hands down by your side. Keeping your eyes closed, I want you to think, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the name Martin Luther King? Now, funny story is, I'm an educator, and oftentimes when I ask my students who Martin Luther King is, their responses is, he's the first black president. And I find it quite funny, but to some degree, he did preside over the people in his day. However, there's a lot that we do not know about Martin Luther King. So I'm going to try really hard to kind of shine a light on who he is or who he was and what he's done or what he's doing even today in his absence. Martin Luther King sought to yoke together people, primarily black people and white people. Yoga, because when we think of mindfulness, the first thing we think of is yoga. Yoga means to yoke together mind, body, and spirit. So let's talk a little bit about yoga and Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, in my opinion, was a yogi. I know what you're saying, and I agree, doesn't make sense right now. Because in America, when we think about yoga, we think of yoga poses, stretching, yoga pants, and yoga mats. However, in its entirety, yoga has 8 limbs to it, right? In this picture is a wheel that represents the 8 limbs, right? But what I want to focus on more intently is those first 2, if you look clockwise, right? The yamas and the niyamas. And this is where Martin Luther King comes into place. Martin Luther King was a huge proponent for nonviolence. These words that you see here are Sanskrit words. Sanskrit is a forgotten language or unused language of Indian culture that really embodied everything that yoga was about. And so in the yamas, which is the first limb of yoga, it talks about non-harming, right? Non-harming means ahimsa. Ahimsa is the practice of nonviolence towards people and things. And again, like I said, yoga has 8 limbs to it. As Americans, we only know about that 3rd limb, which is asana, the A-S-A-N-A word, which means the yoga practice, right? The physical movements. However, Martin Luther King was a practitioner of the yamas and the niyamas. Again, Martin Luther King practiced nonviolence. However, I wonder what caused him to start his practice towards nonviolence. And so as I did a little research and I dug in, I learned that when he was 13 years old, he tried to commit suicide. In fact, he tried to commit suicide twice. Suicide is a part of harming oneself. His father was known to be super, super strict, right? And so from the outside looking in, we might say it was abusive. And as a young man, it wasn't until he was 15 years old that he experienced equality. And in America today, or in today's generation, when you hear equality, a lot of us have experienced a certain amount of equality to some degree. However, this kid was 15 years old when he experienced it for the first time. So I can't imagine what it felt like to think about all of the things that he experienced from the age of 1 to 15, and then that moment where he experienced equality. And so I think that all of these things coupled together may have shaped his mindset towards nonviolence, or ahimsa. Now, I asked you to journal, right? And so on your paper or in your journal, take a moment to think about who you are. Because who we are, where we're from, and our life's experiences drive us to how we show up in the world, right? Who you are, where you're from, and your life experiences shape what we do. And again, when you think about what Martin Luther King experienced as a young kid with his father or his family, to experiencing loss to the degree that he wanted to commit suicide, to just being, growing up in the South at that time, I think that shaped who he was going to become or who he became. So let's unpack that a little bit more. Who was Martin Luther King? He was the son of a preacher. I myself am a PK kid, and I know a bit about what an expectation of a preacher's kid is, right? From the outside looking in, a preacher's kid is seen as supposed to be perfect. He or she is supposed to be perfect. So there's a level of pressure that a PK kid experiences, both said and unsaid, that a lot of kids don't experience. The other thing is, being a son of a preacher, that means that that son's father has this perception or this idea or focus that his family is perfect, right? And so in creating this perfect identity or creating this perfect outlook or showing up in the world perfect brings with it a level of stress. Martin Luther King grew up in the segregated South. Segregation was the separation of people, right? That segregation was enforced by the Jim Crow laws, right? And so Martin Luther King grew up in the height of Jim Crow. Jim Crow was a set of laws that was established to create this second-class citizenness in black people. So even though we were free because slavery had ended officially, the South made it their life's journey or their mission to make sure that you might be free, but you ain't really free. And so this is the experiences that shaped who Martin Luther King was. As an educator, especially in this transition through the pandemic, in this new awakening of equality and wanting to do what's right for and to black people and different diverse people, whether it be gender, race, or orientation, we've been doing a lot of reflection. And we're reflecting on our identities. So, I want to ask you, what are the identities that matter most to you? Our identities are wrapped up in how we love, who we love, and what we love. All right? And those loves are what drive us. When I think about Martin Luther King, he had a love for humanity. And that drove him to the point of being willing to sacrifice whatever he needed to make sure that humanity was okay. Now, my bio was shared earlier. However, like I said, our identities are what drive us. So who am I? I'm a black man because that's how the world sees me. I'm a family man because that's the way I see myself when I look in the mirror. I'm an educator, so that's my daily practice. I teach math. And I'm a yogi. My practice of yoga balances all of those identities that I have of myself or that I experience on a daily basis. Martin Luther King once said, "The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges." So, here are some whirlwinds that happened when I was younger. Funny thing that I won't call it funny, but it's quite ironic that I'm standing here on Lewis and Clark College's campus because I actually went to the elementary school right down the street. I went to Lewis and Clark Elementary School. I only went for one moment, right? Kindergarten. When I was in the kindergarten, I consider myself a very honest kid. And so in kindergarten class, I would frequently, when we got in trouble, whatever getting in trouble as a kindergartner is, the students would have to write their names on the board. I had to write my name on the board quite regularly. The honest student that I am, I would go home and tell my mom that I had to write my name on the board. As a result, I got a whooping for having to write my name on the board. Okay? That was my norm. But there was this one day during arts and crafts where I was wearing my favorite purple, which is why purple is in this slide, ode to my turtleneck. My favorite purple turtleneck got cut. A young girl in my class cut my turtleneck. I'll never forget it. She cut the sleeve. As the problem solver that I was, I then grabbed a pair of scissors and I cut her hair. Now, I didn't see anything wrong with that because she cut my shirt, so it was an even exchange. The school didn't agree with that. As a result, they assessed me for having a behavior disorder. My parents, who are my advocates, really disagreed with that, and that was the moment where they took me from Lewis and Clark Elementary School into East St. Louis School District, which is where my father was teaching at the time. And so I went through my educational career from East St. Louis, from kindergarten to the 12th grade. I ended up graduating top of my class and getting a track scholarship to go off to college. However, that experience right there made me an advocate for kids that don't have advocates. All right? Here's a little statistics. I'm a math teacher. In America, only about 8% of educators are black. Of that 8%, 2% are black males. In the public school system, 80% of students are black. So when you look at that dynamic, right, there are going to be a lot of black and brown students that don't have advocates for them. Because of that knowledge and that experience that I have, that drove me into education. Now, like I said, I went on to go to college on a track scholarship, and I went to Hampton University. Hampton University is a predominantly black college, which means that a majority of the people that you see there are going to be black, which also means that I was a pharmacy major at that time. In my pharmacy classes, all of us were black in there. So I was just a part of the crowd. There was some misfortune that led me to go transfer then to Southeast Missouri State, which is a predominantly white university. I switched my major from pharmacy to chemistry so that I could adhere to my track scholarship so that I can continue to run, basically. And in these chemistry classes, I was the only black person in the whole department. So at that moment, I recognized myself as a minority. I had never been a minority before then. I went to school in East St. Louis, which is predominantly black. went to Hampton University as a freshman in college, which was predominantly black. And then I showed up at SEMO where I was the only one in the class, right? Being the only one in the class might sound admirable, but it's extremely lonely for several reasons. I remember quite vividly asking classmates for assistance with work that they magically forgot how to do. When it came to labs, because in science classes you frequently have to do labs, there was always no partner for me, which led me to have foreign exchange students as my partners. I also remember going to the professor's office for assistance during their office hours, and it being extremely tedious. It been very hard because I could just feel the judgment as I would ask questions, or the dismissiveness when I would ask questions. However, I was able to persist and make it through and graduate with my degree in chemistry. However, that experience, along with other experiences on campus where I dealt with racism and microaggressions, led me to show up in the world to the capacity that I show up, right? Now, I've always had a mindset or a heart for wellness that then grew into mindfulness, but initially it was wellness, right? I was an athlete, but while I was an athlete, my mother introduced me to yoga, and yoga became a practice of mine all the way up until this day. I started doing yoga in the 8th grade, and I continued to do yoga, and now I've been a practitioner of yoga for over 20 years, right? Now, my yoga practice initially was a physical one, right? Asana, limb 3. However, as I began to really think and reflect on how I felt after I practiced yoga, I noticed that there was a level of calmness, stillness after practicing, which then led me to the other branches or the other components of yoga. So it's a very big necessity of mine. But when you think of yoga, what's the first thing that comes to mind? You might say things like women, right? Not just a woman, but a skinny woman. Not just a skinny woman, but a skinny white woman. So imagine how this class might feel when a black man walks in there, right? So what you're imagining, or what you're imagining is what I felt. But as an athlete, I embraced that, right? I embraced that judgment because I knew that, one, there was this look of, you don't supposed to be here, you don't belong here. And so when I showed up on those mats, I showed up to prove that, one, I do belong here. Why? Because I want when someone else that is not a skinny white woman or someone that is maybe in a bigger body or someone that is of a different race or someone of a different sexual orientation that shows up on these mats aren't met with those same judgmental eyes. So in 2018, I got my yoga teacher certification. And upon getting my yoga teacher certification, I partnered with 3 other black yoga teachers, and we created the Collective STL. Why? To create a space for non-white people, particularly black people, to practice mindfulness and yoga. Because in those spaces, when you're feeling that judgment, the purpose of yoga is not that. Yoga is not exercise. Yoga is that fusing, like I said, that yoking of mind, body, and spirit. And I can't yoke together my mind, body, and spirit if I'm dealing with proving myself to you, right? And so we've created this safe space for people to practice yoga. The beginning of this school year, and when I think about this particular article or this situation, at the beginning of the school year, it angers me, it breaks my heart. At the beginning of the school year, there was a chemistry teacher in Kentucky that got into an altercation with a student. In that altercation, this teacher brought up the fact that this young man had been shot earlier. And the level of trauma that probably bubbled out of that kid when that memory was brought up led to a physical altercation. And it was just recently that it came out that this teacher made this comment to this kid, right? Again, like I said, 80% of public school is black. Only 8% of the educators are black, which means that there's going to be a huge number of students that are not protected. In spite of that, I believe that all children should be treated fairly, which drives me to the classroom. I believe that children should feel safe in schools, which again drives me to the classroom. And I believe that children shouldn't have to defend themselves from anybody, particularly teachers and staff, because that's our job, to make them feel safe. And as I thought about that, I remember in Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech that he referenced that he wanted his children to be known for the content of their character and not the color of their skin. And to this day, we're still fighting for our children to be recognized for the content of their character. So, who do you desire to speak for? Take a moment to journal about it or reflect on that. Is it your family? Is it yourself? Or is it a cause? Everybody deserves a chance. I believe everybody deserves happiness. Everybody most certainly deserves peace. But not everybody gets that. I remember a quote from Martin Luther King where he says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." This picture that you see is a circle of young children. They are creating a circle with their feet. If one of those pair of feet leave, it's no longer a circle, right? Let's go back to that quote. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Now, when someone experiences, or when somebody isn't given a chance, it's a form of injustice, right? And so, if the injustice happens in front of me, that injustice happened to me as well. If the injustice happened to me, the people around, because they witnessed it, it happened to them as well, right? However, we don't always respond to what we witness, though it affects us. Which brings me to that word at the bottom of that picture, which says Ubuntu. In my yoga studio, when we end our classes, we say Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a South African philosophy which basically means that my humanity, my existence, is wrapped up in your humanity and your existence. So again, when someone isn't given a chance, that's a form of injustice. And if I witness injustice, I've experienced injustice as well. And so that is, in essence, the embodiment of what Ubuntu means, right? I exist because you are here. My humanity is wrapped up in your humanity. So again, who are you fighting for? Oh, Martin Luther King said, "Every man of humane convictions must decide on the protest that best suits his convictions. But we must all protest." Think about that for a moment. What drives you? Who will you fight for? Take a moment to think on that as well. Now, at the beginning of our discussion, we took a moment and we thought about who Martin Luther King was. Now, I've talked about who Martin Luther King was and who he is. Now, take this moment, close your eyes, and think about your identity. How will you use how you identify with yourself to drive your passions? If your eyes are not closed, take a moment to close your eyes and concentrate on this sound again. Inhale, lift your hands overhead. And And slowly exhale, bringing your hands down by your side. Bringing your hands to your heart. Blink open your eyes. And I honor you by saying, Ubuntu, my existence is wrapped up in your existence. Think about how mindfulness, Martin Luther King's mission of yoking together humanity, can shape how you show up in the world. Thank you.
May your struggles keep you near the cross, and may your troubles show that you need God, and may your battles in the way they should, and may your bad days prove that God is good, and may your whole life prove that God is good. May your troubles keep you near the cross, and may your troubles show that you need God, and may your battles in the way they should, and may your bad days prove that God is good, and may your whole life prove that God is good. Yeah, may your troubles keep you near the cross, and may your troubles show that you really need God, and may your battles in the way they should, and may your bad days prove that God is good, and may your